Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com, and today I'm here with Jonathan Fields. Hi Jonathan.
Hey, awesome to be hanging out.
Oh, it is. It's been so long, and we'll go into that as we talk. But just an introduction, if anyone doesn't know you, Jonathan is a best-selling author, inspirational speaker, and podcaster. He runs the Goodlife Project, a global community with the quest to live more meaningful, connected, and vital lives. His latest book is How to Live a Good Life, Soulful Stories, Surprising Science, and Practical Wisdom, which is out now as this show goes out. So really excited about that. So, Jonathan, I wanted to get started with your writing process, and I was literally just looking back over your site and I saw this quote from you. I wrote 3 different manuscripts. I almost gave up more than once and learned a ton about writing, both about my writing and myself. So you've written other books. So what was it about this book that made it so hard?
Yeah, this book was quite the hero's journey for me. And I think there are a couple of things. One was actually, I'm still trad published. Although we can talk about, I'm sure we'll talk about this a lot more later. We're actually doing a bit of a hybrid with this, which I don't even know if you know about. So maybe a little news for you. I can show you something.
Cool.
I'll break something on your show. But for me, the book that I sold to my publisher was not the book that I ended up writing. So I sold one particular book. I started researching it and realized it really wasn't ready to be written yet. So I went back to my publisher and I said, hey, listen, here's what's going on. It's not the right book at the right time, and explained why. And they were in agreement. I said, but I can write this other book called How to Live a Good Life. And, it aligns beautifully with who I am and with the brand and all this. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. And so then I went out and I just, the way that I work with my editors is, and this has always been my relationship, I don't know why, is I vanish. And then, like 9 months later, I'm like, I hit submit and I send them a completed manuscript. It's not we don't go back and forth sort of on a chapter by chapter basis. And that's what I did. And I handed in my manuscript and they came back to me and they're like, no, this isn't it. I was like, huh. Well, that hasn't really happened to me before. Like you said, it's not my first time in the rodeo. So we sat down, we had a meeting, and I was trying to understand why, it wasn't it. And I got it. And part of the reason, I think, is because this is a very different type of book for me. That, my prior books were all built around careers and entrepreneurship and really focused around that. And this is a book which steps into kind of a new place for me, not new on a personal level, but new from a writing level, which is pretty much pure human potential. And I'm not hugely steeped in books in that space. It's not where a lot of my reading is. So I think I didn't really understand the genre and the way that it needed to be written to really to go down the way it needed to go down. So we had a meeting and we, reworked it. I said, okay, I think I get what I need to do now. I went back, I vanished for months, and then I hit submit, second manuscript, almost completely different, top to bottom. They got back to me a few weeks later and said, this still isn't it either, and we don't know what to tell you. Not what a writer wants to hear. That's like about the last thing you ever want to hear. And at that point, I was like, oh, man, like, what do I do? And I considered, I was like, is this just not right for me? Is it not my genre? Do I give back my advance and just sort of walk away? But publisher wasn't saying we're done with you. They were just kind of saying, like, I think what they were kind of saying to me was, there's something more inside of you, and there's a different way that you need to approach this, but it needs to come from you. Like, you need to figure this out right now because this is a process which is going on in your brain. And, they didn't want to just say, like, here's a formula. So I actually literally went out and I bought the top 10 best-selling books in that space over the last couple of years. Books that were best-selling over a sustained period of time, not because of great marketing, but because of, the nature of the book itself. And to see if I could understand the genre. And as I was reading them, it became really clear that, in fact, there is sort of like one approach that almost all of those books take, with a rare exception, and that the ones that really landed well all follow this almost identical framework. So I reworked my table of contents according to that, and I went back to my publisher and I said, hey, would this work for you? And they looked at it like, yes, that's it. I said, before I say yes, I said, I don't know if I can write this book and still feel okay about just me and my writing style and the way, and I want to bring myself to the world. So I went and I wrote the first, I want to say 4 chapters, partly to show them what it would look like, and partly just to as a test for me to see if as a writer I would be okay writing within these like pretty new set of constraints. And it actually surprised me because normally I do like a deep, nuanced, philosophical thing because that's what I geek out on. But what I realized is in this space, a lot of readers really want you to do a lot of the work for them. And so I had to work within that. And so for me, my new creative challenge, the thing that kept me in it, was trying to master this completely new style, a new set of constraints that I didn't normally write to. And I think that's a big part of what kept me in it through the third draft, is that it wasn't just that I was creating something entirely new that I started to feel would really be useful on a whole different level. But the creative challenge was, can I write something in this very different way and still feel awesome about it and feel like it's doing good in the world? And in the end, the answer was yes to all those questions. But man, it took a bit of a beating for me to get to that place. And in fairness to my publisher, I think part of what they were saying too is, we know you have something better in you, and we want you to go back. And again, like, we all know it's not necessarily the fun part of the process. When you hit that iteration where you just think, you're like, I've done my best, I can't do better, and then somebody's telling me it's still not it. But very often I found, whether it's entrepreneurship or writing or any form of artistic expression, it's like the people who are willing to go back to the canvas or the palette or the keyboard when they feel like they've already hit a wall and like they've given everything they can, and then they pause, they take a little bit of time, and then they're willing to come back and go deeper. That's where the really good stuff tends to happen. So in the end, I'm glad that my editors pushed me.
Yeah, and it's so interesting hearing you talk. There's lots for me to come back on there, but I want to kind of jump into you as a person, because actually what you've just said fits with your career, because a lot of people think, you decide to quit your job and then you become an entrepreneur, and that's like a two-step process. But tell all the listeners, like, so what are the various incarnations of Jonathan Fields? Because you've been like a brief overview of your zigzag journey to where you are now.
Yeah, I have taken a lot of zigs and a lot of zags. I was the kid who was wired to create, and that showed up when I was younger in the form of entrepreneurship, creating my own businesses, to painting. I got really into painting when I was a kid. I have no training whatsoever. Same thing in writing. I've never taken a writing class. I've never taken a painting class. I'm very much an autodidact. So whether it's whatever it is, I love learning myself. So, and I combined the two when I was a kid. So in high school, I made all my walking around money painting album covers on the back of jean jackets. I got to college. I loved music. I started a DJ sound and lighting company, grew that, sold it, took 3 months off, traveled in Australia and went scuba diving. And then came back and went to law school, which a lot of people really didn't understand. They're like, what? But I attended so little class in undergrad that I was really curious what I was sort of intellectually capable of. I thought law school would be great training, even if I never ended up practicing law. So I was fortunate. I worked hard. I did really well in law school and had great opportunities. So I ended up going into the field and practicing, and then ended up hospitalized when my body basically rejected that career. I had surgery, big wake-up call, back to the world of entrepreneurship, this time bundled with fitness and exercise and lifestyle, which was a big love of mine. Ended up making $12 an hour as a personal trainer. Months after that, I opened my first facility, grew that. 2.5 years later, it was a beautiful, flourishing community and business, sold out to an investor group. Took a little time off and started dabbling in writing, but didn't get real serious, and then got interested in the yoga world. This was 2001 now. Signed a lease for a floor in a building in the Hell's Kitchen, New York City, a 6-year lease. Was married, owned a home, had a 3-month-old baby the day before 9/11. And that turned into this stunning journey of like crazy highs, crazy lows. But again, was really fortunate to assemble an amazing team. We built this tremendous community and business, and really flourished. And 7 years in, after teaching and doing a lot of other things and running this, I was ready to move on. I had actually sold my first book at that time because I was really getting more and more into writing just in the background. And I really wanted to focus there. I wanted to focus more on writing and speaking and developing stuff. And I got interested in the online space because I saw that as the future of book marketing. That was the thing that actually brought me to the online world originally. And from there, I sold that company and really started doubling down on writing, speaking, and building community online. And that led to the first book and the second book, then me building a presence as a blogger and a writer. And then 2012, we launched this venture called Goodlife Project, which is media and education. So on the media side, we started out producing broadcast quality video and then moved to podcasting a couple years in. And then on the education side, we produced all sorts of programs, from online courses to year-long intensive retreats to our now annual summer camp for adults, where people from all over the world come and basically just play and frolic and learn for 4 days. And so, and that kind of brings us to where we are now. So there have been, it's not like I made one big pivot. To me, it's this constant evolution, but fundamental to it all is really just a deep questioning of what does it mean to live a good life. And it was a reflective time for me. And I really started looking back and trying to connect, what Steve Jobs famously called like the dots, looking back and see what the through line is. And a lot of it really was about exploring human potential. How can I figure out what it really takes to be here on the planet and get the most out of it, and then turn around and in some way incite possibility and help create community that guides other people to do the same.
Yeah, which is awesome. And I wanted you to say that because, talk about your journey, because so many people just think it has to be like step one, step two, whereas you've shown it's this zigzag. And I always say it's like skiing. Yeah. It's like skiing down a hill. You have to be moving in order to change direction. And, you can't just keep on aiming for the one thing. And then, as you found, you get there and then you're like, okay, well, now I'm ready to do something else. But what's interesting is writing has been a through line also.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny because I'm a little slow, so I didn't key in on it quite so quickly. It took me probably a couple of decades to really realize that actually writing has been something which has been a consistent go-to in various different ways. Even when I was in law school, when I was in law school, I was fortunate I did well. And the first year you get, if you make law review, you're kind of minted. And so I made law review the first year. And I realized the way that I did that was in law school, your entire first year grades were made up of one exam at the end of the year. And how you do on that one exam, generally the top 5 or 10% of the class makes law review. And those exams, for the most part, for me, were essay exams. And what I did was I figured out that there was basically a formula. My brain works in pattern recognition. We've talked about this. So I figured out the pattern, and I understood how to write that pattern. And I basically did it meticulously and ended up doing really well because it leaned on writing. And when I look back in college, the courses I excelled at were all the ones where it was based on papers, not exams. I'm not a great tester, but there was something about writing. But I really didn't key in on it until years later as that being something that actually lit me up too. And something where I actually gained an interest in developing the craft. It's not just about information. Even though the books I've written are prescriptive, it's not about the information for me. That's stuff which has to be there, that has to be useful. But I'm genuinely drawn to the craft. I want to write sentences that in some way land in an embodied fashion and move somebody in some way. And that's my work, and that will probably remain my work for a long time to come. But what you were saying also, there's a really interesting parallel in that, and I'm curious whether you write this way. When I write, very often I'll outline in the beginning, but then what you learn as you're writing, at least when I'm in my process, is as meticulous as I am outlining, at some point I have to also surrender to where the book needs to go. Because at some point, if you hold yourself really rigidly to only the thing that you thought it would be in the very beginning before you started writing, you'll get there quickly and productively and efficiently, but there's a really good chance that you'll have ignored all these serendipitous tangents and things that would have taken you in just a profoundly different and more interesting direction. So even the writing process, it's the same thing. You can plan to a certain extent, but I found that the real magic happens when I work to the plan, but then open myself to serendipity. I'm curious, do you find that in your process too, or are you more sort of formulaic?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, for my fiction, I'm not. I find I'm incapable of plotting, so I'm really trying to work on it. But I'm in the around 55,000 words at the moment in my latest novel, and it's really like, what the hell? But that's part of the fun. But coming back to something else I've noticed about you, and I found you during the Career Renegade. So around 2009, like you were one of the first people I started following online, which is why it's thrilling for me to have you on the show, because, you know, you're another one of my long-term people. And you have always also been Jonathan Fields. Like, you've had Career Renegade, you had Uncertainty, you've had Goodlife Project. To me, your personal brand has come through all the time. And I know some people hate personal brand, but, you know, you've also, in your interviews, you talk a lot about vulnerability. You're very open about more emotional stuff that some people are less willing to share. So how do you get this personal stuff and personal brand into your writing? And how do you cross that line between, you know, the audience and you?
Yeah, it's been an evolution, and I'm wired on more of the introverted side of the spectrum. So I'm not the person that gets lit up by being very forward facing. You know, I love speaking, but the moment I'm done speaking, I kind of want to run and hide and just walk in solitude. I'm also fiercely protective of my family and my personal relationships, and you know, so what's interesting is while I am, you know, online and very active across various social platforms, what you'll see is actually a pretty narrow focus, and I pretty much never use my wife or my daughter's name. Rarely ever post any pictures of either of them, and if I do, they're usually obscured. So every once in a long while I do, but usually not too often, because I may talk about lessons that I've learned or experiences that have happened, but I'll usually do it in a way that's designed to protect anybody else who may have been involved in those experiences. So I need to make it about what I learned or how those experiences have changed me. It's very much like memoir. You know, if a memoir done really well isn't about like what happened, it's about how what happened changed the writer. You know, so I really try and focus on that as well. So while I have been public and I do it because it is good for what I'm building, it's not something I'm always very, very conscious. In the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, how is this going to affect me, the perception of me, and others with whom you know, like I'm around or who may be involved in my personal life. And there's always a line. That said, this new book is hands down the most personal thing, the most vulnerable thing, the most revealing thing I've ever written. There's a lot more memoir in it than, I mean, it's not a memoir, but there's a lot more of me in this book than I've ever shared. And it's, truth told, it makes me uncomfortable. At the same time, the early feedback I've been getting is the stuff which is really landing powerfully are those very moments. You know, it's the moments when, and plus, you know, part of what I write about and part of what I talk about is being vulnerable, is getting real. And so how can I make that argument if I'm not willing to model it myself? So it's this really fine line that I'm constantly working of trying to model the type of behavior that I'm inviting people to engage in, and at the same time being very conscious of privacy. I wish there was a bright line. I wish there was an easy way to say this is the recommendation for everybody, but I really think it's a very personal thing. What I will say though is I think people think that I'm way more public than I really am. You know, the vast, vast, vast majority of what happens in my personal life never sees the social or public or like media side of what I create. You know, 95% of it, you know, is probably completely, you know, happens offline, off social, off media. But also, and you know this too, when you create media on a regular basis, especially video and audio, there's a level of intimacy where people really feel like they know you over time, just because the sound of your voice gets into them. So it's been an interesting journey for sure.
Yeah, I've been listening to your voice for years, so
but you're wired pretty much the same way I am. So
Yeah,
how do
it's
you
true.
deal with that? Because now you're producing really regular media too.
Yeah, well, the weird thing now is my husband and I have been working together a whole year, and people are like, "He's got to come on the show," and I'm like, I still haven't crossed that line, so we'll see. But I want to turn to the book now because a good life. It's a tough phrase. It really is. And you obviously
Yeah.
have the Goodlife Project, and you always ask people on your show, what makes a good life? What is your definition of a good life? And so, I know in the book you've identified various elements that make up a good life. So maybe just explain the elements that you think make up a good life.
Yeah, and a big part of what I thought my work was in the book was not to break new information, because come on, I mean, we've pretty much we've pretty much known what it takes to live a good life for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years. You go back to the Buddhists, you go back to the Stoics. The problem isn't that we don't know what to do. The problem is that it's delivered in a way which is complex and heavy and requires you to buy into beliefs and dogma and all this stuff. And so we don't do anything with it. It just washes through us, or we don't want to do the work to understand it. So what I thought my job was in writing this book was to take all this wisdom that I've been so fortunate to learn through my own life and through sitting down with amazing people, and distill it into a model which was so simple that you hear it once, you remember it for life, and that it actually guides your behavior on a daily basis. And then set up a series of days where people can literally spend 5 minutes just reading something, a story to inspire you, some science to validate it for that rational brain, and then just one simple thing to do. So the model is really simple. There are 3 elements: connection, contribution, and vitality. And those are the 3 buckets. Your connection bucket is about cultivating relationships. Your vitality bucket is about optimizing your state of mind and body. And your contribution bucket is about how you contribute to the world, how you bring your strength, your gifts to the world. So it's really simple, and a good life then is very simply about doing a little something every day to fill those 3 buckets until they're as full as they can be, and then keeping them full, because one of the big laws of the buckets is that they leak. There's no moment in time ever where you're just like, oh, my connection bucket is topped off. I've got all my relationships dialed in, my relationship with an intimate partner, with good friends, with the community, with source. I'm done, and you can just ignore it. There's no time when you can walk away. It's a lifetime practice of filling your bucket. So, to me, I look at a good life, as the process of filling these 3 buckets, and it's not a place that you get to and then just get to say, yeah, I'm here. It's a daily practice. A good life is a daily practice. And that's why the whole rest of the book, really the meat of the book, is a whole bunch of different things to do, to fill your buckets, because how do I actually get people started? That was the goal. So the model is simple. It's almost deceptively simple. In fact, when I started kind of developing it, I thought it was just too easy. And I wondered if it was powerful enough. So I started sharing it. We started teaching it in our programs. The response was mind-blowing. People started talking in the language of the buckets. Like, they wake up in the morning, they're like, you know what? My vitality bucket's feeling like it's a 5 out of 10 today. I'm going to make my priority. I'm going to go do yoga. I'm going to walk around. I'm going to do different things. One person in one of our communities actually decided to have a 3rd child based on looking at her life through the 3 buckets and having a conversation, using the buckets as a framework to have a conversation about whether to have a child with her husband, so it's an amazing thing. It's deceptively simple, but that's what we need. We're so maniacally driven by pace these days that people don't want to have to do the work to figure out what to do. They want really simple, and then they'll do the work to actually do it, but they don't want to have to pile on.
And I think simple but not easy is exactly the same as writing. I mean, writing is just putting one word after another. It's just typing or whatever. But yeah, simple but not easy. So I know people listening understand that. But I did want to challenge you on something because, I was attracted to your work in the more entrepreneurial, making money online type space, book marketing, where you had a course years back. And I love my work. I love the entrepreneurial side as well as the creative side, and I found that there was missing in the book was the work and money side of things. So was that deliberate, and how does that fit into a good life?
It was. And in fact, in an earlier draft, there was a really big conversation about money, happiness, and life satisfaction. So there's a lot of research on that. And I actually do speak about it, but I saved it until there's a more abbreviated conversation in the final chapter, in the end chapter. And the reason I did that, I actually talk about both money and happiness. You won't find them anywhere in the actual, like, the main part of the book. They're both talked about in the final one. And the reason I did that was for a couple of reasons. One is that I do believe, we all need to earn enough to be comfortable in the world. If you're always struggling at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, if you can't earn enough to actually take care of yourself, put food on the table, a roof over your head, put a little money in the bank, and be comfortable, you'll be in scarcity survival mode, and you'll never be able to have time to think about artistry and the transcendent side of life. But most people, once they hit that, and this is where the research starts to come in, shows that there's until you actually hit that threshold, there is definitely a linear relationship between money and happiness. Once you kind of have that baseline covered, as a general rule, every dollar earned or pound earned or euro earned does not any longer increase your level of happiness on a daily basis. So you have to ask, if you're working and working and working because you want to put more money in the bank, what are you sacrificing in the name of that work? So even if you end up with a whole bunch more money, if you have destroyed your health, if you've destroyed your relationships, if you have jettisoned everything and everyone from your life except for the thing that allows you to make more money, you're richer. But are you happier and are you more satisfied with your life? So you're this wonderful example of somebody who actually has been really intentional about the way you make money. So you make a great living now, and you do it doing something that lights you up, surrounding yourself with like a small number of people who you really like to hang out with now, including your husband, assuming you like to hang out.
We do.
And I'm the same way. I'm business partners with my wife, and we love being around each other. It's like the coolest thing in the world. And so,
yeah, I think I more meant like body of work as in I love my work. I like working hard and the satisfaction that comes from working hard. Does that fit into vitality, I guess? Or, where does which bucket does that loving your creative body of work fit?
Yeah, so it's primarily under contribution.
Okay.
And that's, so if we talk about contributing to the world, then we want to contribute in a way that I call it being sparked. And I think that's part of what you're talking about. So being sparked is when you do something that for some way, it's just you're intrinsically drawn to that particular type of pursuit or activity or endeavor. And for whatever reason, you're wired away with that. When you do it, you're just lit up. And so there are 5 different sparks that I've been able to identify so far. I'm actually working on more of these, hopefully. There's a curiosity spark. You got a burning question that you're looking to answer. There's a fascination spark. There's just a topic or an idea that you're fascinated about, even if there's no question. There's an immersion spark where there's a particular activity that when you do it, you just get lost. You're completely absorbed. You don't care about answering a question. It's not about like going deep into a topic. You just want to do more of this because you feel good while you're doing it. There is a mastery spark where you're specifically looking to work towards developing skills towards mastery. And then there's a service spark. You want to be in service of others. And granted, most of us are sparked by some blend of all of these. But if you really get honest with yourself, at any given window of time, we're also there's one which usually really strongly predominates. To earn a living and honoring that primary spark is when you can integrate any one of the first 4 with the latter, with being of service. Because if you're not of service in some way, you don't get paid. So if you're a writer and in some way you either need to be solving a problem or delivering a delight, and that's how you get paid. So for me, like what you do sparks you. You do it because it earns you a really nice living now, but it didn't in the beginning.
No.
And for most writers, it doesn't in the beginning. You do it because it's the thing you can't not do. And you probably don't even understand why. There's something about it where you're drawn to it, and then you may over time be like, you know what, I'm actually developing competence at this. And there are writers who've been writing 20 years out, and I look at sentences that they've written and I'm like, oh man, I would kill to be able to write that sentence, but I know it's going to take me another 10 years to develop my craft. And then you sort of slide into more of a mastery spark, which is, something that draws me to a certain extent these days. So, to me, that's, I think, more of what we're talking about. And then at the same time, are you leveraging your strengths? in a really powerful way. So these things all fall under the contribution bucket. It's contributing to the world in a way that also contributes to you, that lights you up along the way, and hopefully generates money. That said, I'll also tell you that I think it's perfectly okay for the thing that genuinely lights you up, the thing that really fills your contribution bucket, not to also be the thing that you get paid for. For a lot of people, that's it. I have friends who are all they want to do is be awesome parents. And actually, what a horrible thing to say, all they want to do. What they want to do, because it is not an all they want to do. It's a full-time, beautiful, amazing thing that fills their day. They love it. Or somebody else who their favorite thing to do is be in service of, some community that maybe it's kids who are in need or struggling or in inner cities, and they're never going to earn a living doing that, but they'll spend a lot of their waking hours devoted to it because they cannot do it. It lights them up, and that's okay. So sometimes if you're fortunate and you can construct a way for those things to overlap, but sometimes it's harder to do that, and that's still okay.
No, I totally agree. And I think there's too much emphasis on like you have to make a living with writing, which isn't necessary, and both of us have multiple streams of income from other things. And I did want to talk about that because you have this camp, which is amazing, Camp GLP.
Which you have to come to one time.
I really want to. When you were in Costa Rica, I was like, I really want to go to Costa Rica and play in this camp. But one of the things you say in the book is you talk about people giving up so much in the name of being an adult, and that really resonated with me. And I try and play, I have some colouring, and I try and play with my writing. I mean, like I'm writing some really like quite fantastical stuff right now, and I'm trying to be accepting of some of my crazy mind things, which you would embrace as a child. You'd be like, yeah, that's really cool, and now I'm like, this is really stupid, but it's not, it's just playing. So how can the listeners and how can adults in general return to this kind of playful attitude without giving up all responsibility?
Yeah, well, I think like step one is to understand that you don't like, there's no thing anywhere that basically there's no research I've ever seen that shows that being a grown-up means that you slowly start to just extract levels of fun from your life, but that's what we're kind of like culturally we think, well, that's what it is. We get more serious. If you're going to be responsible, if you're going to be a grown-up, that means you don't play as much, there's not as much fun, you don't goof around as much. It's the complete opposite. A dear friend of mine, I think you know him too, Jeffrey Davis. So he's a writer, and he told me once, he said, like, my goal as a grown-up, and he's a dad, two beautiful little girls. He said, my goal is to live in a way where when my daughters look at me, they have no desire to stay kids because they see being a grown-up as just as much, if not more fun as being a kid. So a lot of it for him is modeling it, but I think a lot of it really just comes down to letting go of this really arcane notion that being a grown-up and being responsible, that there is some sort of opposition between being responsible and living in the world and also being light and exalting play. What I found is that if you start looking for things in your day, almost no matter what it is, both good and bad, you will find myriad opportunities to embrace it, And so if you're like, look, I want to do a play challenge. For the next 24 hours, I'm going to be walking around my day looking for opportunities to be playful, to create them. You will start, if you plant the seed in your sort of, like conscious brain or subconscious brain, simply priming your brain to start to see opportunities to play. They're all around you all day long, but we reject them because we're supposed to do the, quote, responsible thing and be serious. And how much fun are we taking out of life by doing that? I'm having flashbacks to the movie Stripes with Bill Murray and a line from a character named Francis, or just saying, lighten up, Francis. Sometimes you just want to shake people and say, lighten up, because life's short. It's interesting. I think for some of us, you get a little bit older. So So here's interesting research. A lot of people would think that the older we get, the less happy we get. Actually, the data is really crystal clear. The research shows that the older we get, the happier we get, and the more satisfied we get with our lives. Even though there's more illness, there's less physical function, there's all sorts of struggle that we're dealing with, because you get far enough into life and you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, time's going quick. You know what? All those things that I thought were crazy big dilemmas and problems and drama, they really didn't matter much, and you start to lighten up. You gain perspective that allows you to lighten up. And I wonder what would happen if we actually start to prime ourselves on a daily basis to lighten up now rather than wait decades further.
Yeah, and we've certainly had the death of people like Prince and, real creatives who, it's just like, oh my goodness, gotta get on with life, and also I'm very lucky, like my husband. I feel like those of us who are very serious, someone comes into our life who helps us play, and my husband plays that role of really just helping me to stop being so serious. So that's a great challenge. I'm very goal orientated, so I'm now going to take the play challenge. Okay, so we don't have much.
Be sure you make a spreadsheet for your place.
Exactly, there will be. I will tick things off. In fact, since your yoga, my friend Orna said to me, you realize that yoga, because I've started doing yoga, and I'm like, my challenge with yoga is to be able to sit in this particular way. And she's like, you realize there is no challenge with yoga, it's a practice. And I'm like, oh, right, but I'm still, it's just the way I'm wired. But anyway, we're running out of time. I've got to come back to publishing. So at the beginning, you said that this might be more of a hybrid project. So what did you mean, and what is the reveal?
Okay, so the book that you mentioned in the beginning, actually I have it sitting next to me. This is the actual finished cover, right? So that's the actual hard book. This is coming out, and that's being published. That's Trad, that's Hay House, and my publisher. They run with the whole thing. And for me right now, it still makes sense to go that way, because I make a comfortable advance, which is nice. And I get the support. I get distribution in traditional bookstores for as long as that matters, right? Who knows at this point? And I also speak. Part of the way I earn my living is I speak. And in that slice of the world, being traditionally published still matters. So for me, that still matters. And I've had a great experience with them so far. That said, at the same time, we wanted to create something extra. So we want to actually create something, a companion to this book. So we created actually a companion journal. That's a 6-month practice journal. So we want to create something where you started with a book, it gave this idea, and then 30 days to really dive deep and start to create behavior. And then we wanted to actually create a tool that would allow you to build a daily practice, like a morning practice and an evening practice over time. So we could have gone back to a publisher and said, let's do this, but we want to run our own experiment. So what we created was actually this.
Ooh, it's a little box.
Yeah, so it's a sleeve.
Ah.
Right?
Oh, it's like a moleskin notebook.
Yeah, and it's hardcover. We designed the entire thing ourselves. It's 4 color on the first few pages, 2 color on the inside.
Oh, very nice.
So that it's a fully, it's not just an open journal, but it's a fully, there's a ton, there's 200 something pages of actual stuff inside of it. And we're offering that as a companion to the book. And we do that ourselves. These are actually, we designed them, we wrote them, we printed them, we went through all the stuff to actually have them printed overseas. Right now they're on a shipping container over where they'll then land in a fulfillment house. And, so we actually invested in actually sort of old school printing, not even print on demand or create space and stuff like that. And so it's an interesting hybrid for us, because we've got these 2 things coming out simultaneously, one through the traditional publisher and one through us. And so now we've actually navigated the entire process of doing it ourselves, not just print on demand, but also really printing inventory and stuff like that. And it's complex. It's complicated.
Yeah, definitely.
But it'll be an interesting experiment, because we also know that the margins, on one versus the other, you can't compare. So right now, I would kind of say we've got this dual, this hybrid launch that we're moving into right now, and it'll be a really fun experiment to see how everything goes. And I make a decision about how I'll publish with each new book when I decide to write that book. So I've already got other books spinning in my head, as I'm sure we all do, right? Everyone sort of watching this. And to me, it's, when I decide to focus on that, I will probably, which will be pretty soon actually, because I tend to shift gears pretty quickly. Then I'll start to decide, am I going to go trad with this, or am I going to go indie? or again, create some sort of hybrid version that just works best for me. So yeah, I don't think there's any one right option. I remember you, like we were hanging out in Austin a couple of months back, and you're like, let me just tell you what my business model is. And I'm like, it sounds so good.
Just circling right back to the beginning, you said you have 2 other manuscripts. So what the hell? What the hell is happening with those? Because I was thinking, well, you could put those out at the same time. I mean, there's another option.
It is. And what I'm probably going to do is take a bunch of what was in that and release it as essays or long articles, either, on my blog to my people, or potentially, as op-eds somewhere or other stuff like that. So I actually haven't figured out what I'm doing with all of that right now, but I do have a lot of editorial that's sort of sitting and waiting for something to happen with it. So maybe it turns into, like a mini digest, like 10 essays or something like that I just released that go deeper into specific topics for people who want to, kind of have a more nuanced, deeper exploration.
Yeah, which you could put out on Kindle and then as an indie book, and and this is the beauty of it, right? You can do whatever you like.
Yeah. It is. It's amazing. I mean, if you really understand, I just think it's such an incredible time to be an author. If you're willing to actually step into a place of taking responsibility and control.
Absolutely.
If you just want to write and only write, it may not be the greatest time, unless you don't care. Like if you don't have any need to earn a living from doing it, God bless, just go write, do what you need to do. But the moment you actually want somebody to pay you for it, then you have choices to make. And if you're willing to actually step into being that person, like sort of like creating what you've created, which is amazing, blows my mind when I think about when I first met you to what you've done now. It's just like my jaw drops. It's so like hats off to you. It's just amazing. And who knows? I mean, because I think I mentioned to you when we were talking, I have fiction in me. So when it comes to doing that could be a whole different story.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of my last question. You are the master of reinvention. You've got the Goodlife Project, which is obviously there's the podcast, there's the camp, there's the training courses, there's all these other things. There's a new book. Do you see another reinvention on the horizon, like you mentioned with the fiction, or something else? Is there anything bubbling up?
I wouldn't say a substantial reinvention, on the level I've done stuff in the past, although I wouldn't rule it out a couple of years down the road. But right now I'm really focused on building our Goodlife Project, the company, the community, what we're doing. But I will no doubt, I'm constantly running experiments. I mean, nonstop. And I am getting more and more interested in the fiction side of things. I know nothing about how to do it. But that hasn't really stopped me with pretty much anything else at this point. So I'm gonna probably start it in the background, just start to read up on the structure and the framework and how to actually put together solid fiction. And then and not very likely not literary fiction, but more just like thriller, page turner, fun type of stuff.
Woohoo!
I think that would be a lot of fun to play in that domain a little bit. So we'll see where that leads.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So where can people find you and your books and everything you do online?
Yeah, best place these days is really just goodlifeproject.com. And for more info on the book, it's just goodlifeproject.com/book, or just anywhere. It's available in booksellers around the world. It's being published simultaneously in the UK and Australia. So it's pretty much anywhere you want it, you'll find it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time, Jonathan. That was great.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.